For my book review, I did For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too by Christopher Edmond. I'm just going to kind of go through the questions 1 through 5 and address them all. The first one talks about what you feel is the most salient point this book is trying to make. So, this author, he really is talking to educators who teach in urban areas and is speaking about the divide that exists between the traditional schools in which they teach and the unique culture of their students. So, it's really talking, it is really here to focus on a way to better connect teachers with their diverse students. And really, it's very a student-centered book and how teachers can meet those needs of their different students and their diverse students and really kind of bridge the gap between the two. So throughout the book, a term that he uses a lot is neo-indigenous, and I'm going to use a quote from the book to kind of explain this, and it says, neo-indigenous is to acknowledge powerful connections among populations that have dealt with being silenced. So neo-indigenous students are often looked at as the troublemakers, and they are viewed as intellectually and academically lower than their counterpoints because of their racial and social economic backgrounds. So this book is focused on those students who are marginalized and are oppressed for factors that are out of their control. The second question says, in what ways does this text fit into our discussion of cultural responsive pedagogy? I think it fits in completely. So that cultural responsive pedagogy is really student-centered. It's really student-focused, and it's how we can meet the needs of that student. And like I said, really bridging that gap. This book does all of that. And what I really like, it's what the teacher can do to meet the student. I think a lot of the times we always want the student to meet us halfway, come to us. But really, it's on the teacher. You know, I teach elementary school, and I do have a class of diverse students. And sometimes it's hard for them to speak up and say, hey, because of my diverse background, I'm not really connecting with you in this way. And I think this book really talks about it. From a simple example, there was a teacher in here who was having a really hard time connecting with her students. And the author had a conversation with her and was like, first she had said how she didn't understand how these kids were coming to school and they had all these nice clothes and these nice shoes, but then parents can't show up to conferences, they can't get a hold of them, they're on free and reduced lunch. So the teacher wasn't understanding if they're on free and reduced lunch, they're not coming up to school, they're not making an effort, how can they then go spend money on clothes and shoes? And the author said, well, think how it would be to send your kid to school and look different. They just want their kid to fit in. And so he had recommended to her, go buy a cool pair of shoes that your kids will like. And then that kind of like makes a small connection, you know, and it seems silly. But even with my kids, I think of when I get a new pair of shoes, how much they love them. My kids are all into Nikes, and I'm really not into shoes. But if I get a new pair of running Nike shoes, they love them. So it's just like a small way to connect that we don't really think about that's important to maybe their culture or how they were raised. So this book is very student-centered. Like I said, it's ideas for teachers to help meet the needs of their students, break down that barrier that we have set. And also it talks about how there are things aside from academics that are so important, that the fundamentals that we have to build up our classroom to make students feel important, to make them feel welcome and respected and valued in the classroom. And I think sometimes that really gets skipped over. You know, we spend the first week of school building those classroom families, getting to know each other, and then it kind of dwindles away, and then we're focused on academics. And this book really brings back, hey, it's important to know your kids. It's important to know their differences and where they come from and how that affects them in the classroom. Number 3 says, what have you learned from this text that might influence your future curricular instructional practices? So a lot of things, and not necessarily, some of the things that I took away were not even really about academics, but it was more the environment and the tone that I set in my classroom. Something that really stuck to me was the author had a chapter called Church, and it simply talked about in church, in a Black church, the preacher connects with the congregation with call and response. So he says, can I get an amen? And he waits for the congregation to throw their hands up and say amen. And so in that culture, that call and response is a way to engage the congregation. And so you can use that in a secular way. And so he was saying, to connect with your kids, use phrases from hip hop songs. One was, can I proceed? And they say, yes, indeed. And that's a common, that was a lyric from, I think he said, like a Jay-Z song. So just doing small things, like hip hop is a big part of some of my kids' culture and some of their backgrounds. And so bringing those things in and not having it to always do with the academics, but showing them that you're connecting with them and you see them and what's important to them, you want to know about, and is also important to you. So just small things like that, like the call and response. Also meaningful jobs, responsibilities. I have my kids do jobs, but this author really talked about giving kids that responsibility and making them feel a part of the classroom, making them feel valued. When they come to school, they know what their job is. Yes, they're supposed to be a learner, but without them, our classroom wouldn't function. We need them there. He gave an example of a student whose job was to be the whiteboard eraser, and she wasn't there. So that day they couldn't get the board erased. Some kids had offered to volunteer, and he said, no, that's her job. So when she came back, they didn't make her feel bad for not doing her job, but they're like, we missed you. We needed you yesterday. We're glad you're back so our class can function again as a whole. So I thought that was a great point that I really want to start bringing in, because I do jobs, but really making them more meaningful. And I'm trying to hurry up because I know you said 3 to 5 minutes and I'm already 6 minutes in. But this was such a good book. Number 4 says, what connections can you make between this book and some of the authors that we have read in this course? I was going through some of my discussion posts, and one that stuck out was our on critical pedagogy. And specifically when we talked about one of the chapters, I don't remember, or let's see, it was by the Ladson Billings, and he talks about culture relevant pedagogy as a form which focuses on collective, not merely individual empowerment. So really bringing the class together as a whole. We are one, all for one for all. So I really liked that, and I had even asked a question about, what about a student who has a fixed mindset and struggles to see how they can come to class and be molded into academic success? And I think a lot of that, like that author was talking about, is we have to be collective. A student shouldn't feel like they're on their own, that they're not being successful. We have to be there to pull each other in. So I thought that was a really good connection to this book about being a collective whole, making that cosmopolitan classroom, and really being one. And then there was another one from one of our textbooks, and I don't remember what chapter it was, but it talked about, and a quote was, an approach, so it was talking about critical pedagogy, and it says, is an approach through which students and teachers engage in learning as a mutual encounter with the world. Wow. That was just what this book was talking about. You know, it's not just the teacher standing in front teaching the class. It's mutual. We all have to come together. We're in this together. We can't make a student learn. I can give them all the information, all the books, all the resources, but in the end, they have to make that choice. And we want them to choose, yes, I want to learn. And that really comes from being together. And this book kind of talks about that, but in a way of how to bring those kids in that we can't connect with, because maybe they're different than us and we're not used to their culture and their background outside of school, and that's okay. But it's recognizing that and bringing that into the classroom. The last question says, what about this book has challenged you, your personal identity and or your identity as an educator? I will say the most eye-opening was, and this is going to seem small, but there was a part in here where it talked about a teacher could not get a kid to take his hat off in school. And I know a lot of schools have the rule of no hats and no hoods. But what he was saying is, the author was saying is, in their culture, that's like part of their wardrobe. They're used to wearing a hat. They're used to wearing a hood. When they go home, that's what they do. When they're watching videos, and that's what the people they follow, the basketball players, anybody that they look up to, it's part of who they are. And so when we're telling them that they can't do it, yet it has nothing to do with their academics, we're picking a battle we don't want to fight. And I fight that battle all the time with hats and hoods. And when he said, is it affecting you're teaching, is it affecting their learning? If not, why pick that battle? Why take something away from a kid that makes them feel comfortable in the classroom? If that hood or that hat is going to help them be successful and make them feel more comfortable in my class, and it's not going to affect their learning and not going to affect my teaching, that's fine. But he also said to talk about when it's appropriate to wear hats and when it's not. If you were to go into a restaurant, how you normally take your hat off as a sign of respect. So knowing that, yes, it's fine to wear it in my classroom, but there will be some circumstances or instances in your life where you can't wear it. So it's also teaching them when the appropriate and inappropriate time was. And the last thing, and I'm trying to wrap this up, that I really liked was building that cosmopolitan classroom, really becoming one. One thing that I really want to try in my classroom is the idea of a handshake. And so a classroom handshake. And so how it starts is it's something that you use when a kiddo gets a question right. So the teacher starts with just putting their hand out and shaking their hand. And if Jim were to get the question right, you would go over, I would shake his hand. We would do a formal handshake, and then he would add something to it like a fist bump. So then our classroom handshake would be a shake and a fist bump. And then we would keep adding on. And then eventually we would have this handshake that when somebody gets a question right or does something well, we do this handshake. And it's something I initiate with the student to kind of to say, hey, you did awesome. Nice work. You're a part of our family. You did your job. Way to go. So I really liked that idea of kind of like bonding and bringing the classroom together. I know I've talked a lot and I feel like I've talked really fast and I didn't even get all my points in that I wanted to. But I really like this book. It was very eye-opening. I was talking to one of my coworkers who is a Black male. I was actually student taught in his classroom, and he read through my paper, and his response was that yes, it has good information, but it's also kind of sad that somebody had to write a book to help urban youth in our class. You know, there's not a book on how to help the affluent white kids, how to teach them. So, I was like, wow, that does make a good point. Coming from an African-American teacher to him say, yes, that's great. But he was like, well, it seems like a book for white people to learn how to teach Black kids. And I can see where he gets that perception. And I think there's a lot of great ideas in here. Is everything perfect? No. Do I agree with everything? No. But I thought it had some great resources, some great things to pull through. It was a quick read. I actually got it on my phone and I listened to it and followed along while I was on spring break. But I did think it was interesting how he was saying you don't have books for teachers on how to teach affluent white kids. So I did think that was an interesting comment from him. But like I said, I love this book. For white folks who teach in the hood, and the rest of y'all too. Fun title. I had heard a lot about it, so I was really happy that I got to read it. I hope that I got everything, and I look forward to hearing about the rest of your books. Bye.